Poor Maid accidentally sees the millionaire changing. Her life changes forever. The morning mist clung to the ground as Lena opened her eyes, well before the first rays of sunlight could peek through her small bedroom window. Her worn alarm clock showed 4:30 a.m., but she had barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. The familiar creaks of the old wooden floor beneath her feet felt different today. Everything felt different. Her small room, with its faded floral wallpaper and hand-sewn curtains, had been her sanctuary for 23 years. Now she was leaving it behind, even if only temporarily. The job offer as a live-in maid at the Hale estate promised enough money to help her family through their financial struggles. Lena's fingers trembled slightly as she packed her old brown suitcase, the one her grandmother had given her years ago. She folded each piece of clothing carefully, 3 sets of simple work dresses, some everyday clothes, her Sunday best, and the few personal items she couldn't bear to leave behind. Her mother's silver cross necklace went in last, wrapped in a soft handkerchief. "Lord," she whispered, kneeling beside her bed, "please guide my path and keep my family safe while I'm away." The familiar words brought comfort, even as her heart squeezed with uncertainty. Downstairs, her mother was already up, the smell of fresh coffee filling their modest kitchen. "I made your favorite breakfast," she said, her voice wavering slightly as she set a plate of homemade biscuits and gravy on the table. "Mom, you didn't have to," Lena started, but her mother just pulled her into a tight hug. "Let me do this for you, sweetheart." Her father appeared in the doorway, still in his work clothes from the night shift at the factory. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, but he managed a warm smile. "Your old dad wanted to see you off properly," he said, joining them at the table. Her younger sister Emma slouched in, still half asleep but determined to be present for the goodbyes. The family breakfast felt both precious and painful. They talked about simple things, the weather, Emma's school projects, Mom's garden, avoiding the heavy reality of Lena's departure. But the clock on the wall kept ticking, and soon it was time. The journey to the Hale estate took most of the day. Lena watched through the bus window as familiar landscapes gave way to unknown territory. The small towns grew more sparse, the houses more elaborate. Her worn suitcase sat at her feet, a reminder of the life she was temporarily leaving behind. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the countryside, the bus dropped her at the last stop. "The Hale estate is about a half-mile down that road," the driver said, pointing to a tree-lined lane. "Can't miss it." Lena walked slowly, her suitcase feeling heavier with each step. The autumn air grew cooler as dusk approached, and the trees seemed to whisper secrets she couldn't quite understand. After what felt like an eternity, she saw it, the imposing iron gates of the Hale estate, intricate metalwork gleaming in the fading light. The estate itself loomed beyond, a massive stone mansion that seemed to touch the darkening sky. As she approached, the gates opened with an electronic hum, as if expecting her. Lena took a deep breath and stepped through, jumping slightly as they closed behind her with a definitive clang. Standing there, with shadows stretching across the manicured lawn and silence pressing in from all sides, an unexpected wave of unease washed over her. The mansion's windows stared down at her like dark, unwelcoming eyes, and for a moment she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Mrs. Graves, the stern-faced housekeeper, led Lena through the mansion's winding corridors. Their footsteps echoed against the polished hardwood floors, magnifying the emptiness of the vast space. Ornate wallpaper and gilded frames lined the halls, a stark contrast to the simple home Lena had left behind. "Most of the staff take their leave during the autumn months," Mrs. Graves explained, her keys jingling as she walked. "Mr. Hale prefers his privacy during this season. It will be just you, me, Cook, and Mr. Peterson, the groundskeeper." She paused, turning to face Lena. "And Mr. Hale himself, of course, though you'll rarely see him." They climbed a narrow servants' staircase to the 3rd floor. The temperature dropped noticeably, and Lena pulled her cardigan closer around her shoulders. The corridor here was plain, with simple white walls and wooden doors spaced evenly apart. "This will be your room." Mrs. Graves unlocked the last door on the right. Basic, but serviceable. Lena stepped inside, taking in the small space. A single bed with iron frame sat beneath a dormer window. There was a plain wooden dresser, a small desk with a chair, and a narrow closet. The walls were bare, except for a simple mirror. A worn but clean rug covered most of the wooden floor. "Bathroom is shared, 2 doors down," Mrs. Graves continued. "Your uniform is in the closet. 3 sets. Keep them pressed. Meals are served in the servants' kitchen. Breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, dinner at 6 in the evening." She checked her watch. "It's nearly dinner now. I'll show you to the kitchen once you've settled in." Lena set her suitcase on the bed. "Thank you, Mrs. Graves. Your duties begin tomorrow at 7 sharp. I'll give you a proper orientation then." With that, the housekeeper departed, leaving Lena alone in her new room. The silence felt heavy. Back home there was always some noise: her sister's music, her mother's humming, the neighbor's dog barking. Here, the quiet pressed against her ears like cotton wool. After unpacking her few belongings, Mrs. Graves returned to guide her to the servants' kitchen in the basement. The space was warm and well lit, but vast for the few people it now served. A heavy wooden table dominated the center, with enough chairs for 20 people. Only one place was set. "Cook's left your dinner warming in the oven," Mrs. Graves said. "She retires early, as do I. You'll meet them both tomorrow." She pointed out the dishes and utensils drawer. "Help yourself to tea if you'd like. Good evening, Miss Chen." Lena found the covered plate in the oven: roast chicken, potatoes, and vegetables, all still warm. She sat at the lone place setting, the scrape of her chair echoing in the empty kitchen. The food was good, but each bite felt heavy in her mouth as she ate alone in the cavernous space. The tick of the kitchen clock seemed unnaturally loud. Somewhere above, a floorboard creaked, making her start. The mansion's silence had a weight to it, different from the peaceful quiet of her village home. This silence felt watchful, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Lena finished her meal quickly, unable to shake the feeling of being small and alone in this enormous place. She washed her dishes carefully, the running water providing brief relief from the oppressive quiet. As she dried the last plate, another creak sounded from above, and she hurried to return to her room, unwilling to spend any more time in the empty kitchen. The morning sun barely peeked through the mansion's tall windows as Lena began her first day of work. Mrs. Graves had left her a detailed list of tasks, with the dining room as her starting point. The enormous space felt impossibly grand with its crystal chandelier and silk wallpaper, making Lena's cloth and polish seem inadequate for such splendor. She worked methodically, the way her mother had taught her. "Start from the top," she whispered to herself, reaching up with her duster to tackle the crown molding first. The familiar motions helped calm her nerves, though the room's size meant what would normally be a quick job stretched into an hour's work. A sound from the hallway made her pause. Through the partially open door, she caught a glimpse of a tall figure passing by. Mr. Hale himself, she realized with a start. He moved like a shadow, quiet and quick, his shoulders hunched slightly as if carrying an invisible weight. Though he didn't look her way, Lena instinctively stepped back, nearly bumping into the dining table. When she peered out into the hall a moment later, he was already gone, only the soft sound of a closing door somewhere in the distance indicating he'd been there at all. As the day progressed, Lena worked her way through several other rooms, each more elaborate than the last. The library took her breath away with its floor-to-ceiling shelves and leather-bound books. The morning room dazzled with its gilt mirrors and pale blue silk walls, yet each space felt unused, like a museum where nothing was meant to be touched. In the afternoon, while cleaning the conservatory's windows, she spotted Mr. Hale again. He stood in the garden, staring at nothing in particular, his hands clasped behind his back. Even from a distance, something about his posture spoke of isolation. When Cook rang the bell for the staff's lunch, he flinched at the sound and quickly disappeared inside through another entrance. "Does Mr. Hale ever eat with anyone?" Lena asked Cook during lunch, helping to dry dishes in the warm kitchen. Cook, a round-faced woman with gray-streaked hair, shook her head. "Takes all his meals in his study, he does. Been that way for years now." She handed Lena another plate. "Best not to disturb him unless he calls for something." Evening found Lena in her small room, sitting on the edge of her bed. The day's work had left her physically tired, but her mind wouldn't rest. She thought about the massive rooms she'd cleaned, filled with beautiful things but devoid of life. No family photos on the walls, no books left casually on side tables, no signs that anyone actually lived in those perfect spaces. The brief glimpses she'd had of Adrian Hale seemed to match his house, beautiful but distant, like a painting behind glass. She remembered how he'd startled at the lunch bell, as if unexpected sounds were unwelcome intruders in his carefully ordered world. Lena pulled out the letter she'd received from her mother just before leaving home. The paper was already soft from multiple readings, the familiar handwriting bringing comfort. At home, their small house had always been full of noise and life, her father's laugh, her sister's singing, her mother's constant bustle in the kitchen. This mansion, for all its grandeur, felt like the opposite of home. The silence that filled its halls wasn't peaceful. It was lonely, a quiet born of absence rather than contentment. As Lena got ready for bed, she couldn't help but wonder about the man who lived in this beautiful, empty place, and what had made him build such perfect walls around himself. Shafts of late-afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows, creating long shadows in the mansion's West Wing hallway. Lena's arms ached pleasantly from hours of washing and folding linens. The stack of fresh laundry she carried filled her nose with the clean scent of lavender soap, reminding her of wash days back home. Her mind wandered to the letter she needed to write to her family. They'd be worried, even though she'd only been gone 3 days. What would she tell them about this strange, silent house? About its even stranger owner who seemed more ghost than man? The thick carpet muffled her footsteps as she made her way down the unfamiliar corridor. Graves had given her directions to the linen closet, but all these hallways looked the same, with their identical dark wood panels and evenly spaced doorways. Was it the third door on the right, or the fourth? A loose pillowcase slipped from her stack, and Lena awkwardly tried to catch it with her elbow. The movement sent the whole pile wobbling. She bit her lip, steadying the laundry against her chest. The metal doorknob felt cool under her fingers as she turned it, pushing the door open with her hip. This can't be right, she thought, stepping into what was clearly a bedroom. Rich afternoon light poured through vast windows, illuminating deep blue walls and heavy wooden furniture. A massive 4-poster bed dominated one wall. This was definitely not the linen closet. Movement caught her eye. There, by a partially open wardrobe, stood Adrian Hale. His back was to her as he pulled off his dress shirt, revealing lean muscles and unexpectedly broad shoulders. Lena froze, her mouth falling open in horror. The laundry slipped from her arms, hitting the floor with a soft thump. Adrian spun around, his expression shifting from surprise to something darker. For a brief moment, their eyes met, his wide with shock, hers mortified. "I'm so sorry," Lena gasped, her face burning hot. "Wrong door. I was looking for the linen closet. I didn't mean to—" The words tumbled out in a panicked jumble as she backed away, nearly tripping over the fallen laundry. Adrian grabbed for his shirt, his movements sharp and defensive. The muscles in his jaw clenched, but before he could speak, Lena had already fled. She practically ran down the hallway, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She didn't stop until she reached the servants' stairs, where she sagged against the wall, covering her face with trembling hands. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," she whispered. She'd walked in on her employer changing clothes. She'd seen him half-dressed. She was going to be fired for sure. The memory of his startled expression, followed by that flash of what looked like anger, made her want to curl up and disappear. Of all the ways to make a terrible impression, this had to be one of the worst. What must he think of her now? The fallen laundry still lay scattered outside his door, she realized with fresh horror. But there was no way she could go back there now. Not after that. She'd rather face a dozen angry bears than return to that hallway. Instead, she stayed pressed against the wall, trying to catch her breath, her cheeks still burning with embarrassment. How was she ever going to face him after this? Lena paced the small confines of her servant's room, her stockinged feet wearing an invisible path in the worn carpet. The setting sun cast long shadows through her window, but she couldn't bring herself to light the lamp. The darkness matched her mood. Every creak of the old house made her jump. Any minute now, she expected a knock at her door. Mrs. Graves returning early to dismiss her, or worse, Adrian himself coming to tell her to leave. The memory of their awkward encounter made her cheeks burn all over again. She sank onto the edge of her narrow bed, wringing her hands in her lap. "Stupid, stupid, stupid," she muttered. 3 days. She'd managed to last only 3 days before ruining everything. What would her family say when she returned home in disgrace? How would they manage without her wages? The dinner she'd prepared sat untouched on her small table, just bread and cheese, since she couldn't face going to the main kitchen. Her stomach was too knotted with anxiety to eat anyway. The incident played over and over in her mind. The wrong door, Adrian's startled expression, the way he'd reached for his shirt with such defensive anger. Hours ticked by on her small bedside clock. The house grew quieter, if that was even possible in this tomb-like mansion. Still no summons came. The waiting was almost worse than being fired outright. Finally, Lena stood up. "Better to leave with dignity," she whispered to herself, pulling her battered suitcase from under the bed. She'd pack now and slip away at first light. That way she wouldn't have to face anyone's disappointment or anger. Her few belongings looked pitiful as she laid them out on the bed. 3 dresses, carefully folded. 2 sets of undergarments. The small wooden cross her mother had given her for protection. A worn photograph of her family, taken last Christmas. Had it only been 3 days since she'd left them? It felt like a lifetime ago. Lena picked up her best dress, the one she'd worn to arrive at the estate. It still smelled faintly of home, of her mother's cooking, and her father's pipe tobacco. A lump formed in her throat as she smoothed the fabric. She'd been so full of hope then, so certain this job would help her family. Her hands shook slightly as she packed each item. The routine of folding and organizing helped calm her nerves, but couldn't completely banish the ache in her chest. She'd failed. Failed her family, failed at this opportunity, failed to even manage the simple task of finding the right door in this massive house. When everything was packed except her nightgown and tomorrow's clothes, Lena sat heavily on the bed beside her suitcase. The room felt even smaller now, more temporary. She'd leave a note for Mrs. Graves, she decided. An apology for leaving without notice, but she couldn't face the shame of being dismissed. "Dawn," she told herself firmly, setting her small alarm clock. She'd need to leave early to catch the first train home. At least that way she might avoid running into Adrian in the hallways one last time. Lena changed into her nightgown and slipped under the covers, though she doubted sleep would come easily. Her packed suitcase stood by the door like a silent accusation, a reminder of her failure. Tomorrow she'd begin the long journey home, back to the life she'd hoped to leave behind. The first hints of dawn were just beginning to streak the sky when Lena crept down the mansion's grand staircase. Her worn suitcase felt heavy in her trembling hand, each step creaking beneath her feet despite her careful movements. The marble foyer lay ahead, its vastness seeming to mock her hasty departure. "Miss Walker." The quiet voice nearly made her drop her suitcase. Adrian Hale stood in the doorway of his study, still dressed in yesterday's clothes. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept. His usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his fingers through it all night. Lena's heart hammered in her chest. She clutched her suitcase tighter, knuckles white against the handle. "Mr. Hale, I was just... Would you join me for a moment?" His voice was calm, betraying no emotion. He gestured to the study door. "Please." Lena's legs felt like lead as she followed him into the wood-paneled room. A lamp cast warm light over the desk, where papers lay scattered as if he'd been working through the night. The leather chairs by the fireplace looked soft and inviting, but Lena remained standing, her suitcase a shield between them. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. Adrian moved to stand behind his desk, maintaining a careful distance that made Lena's chest ache with shame. "I thought it best," she managed, staring at the intricate pattern of the Persian rug. "After yesterday's incident, I didn't want to cause any further discomfort." "Sit down, Miss Walker." When she hesitated, he added more softly, "Please." Lena perched on the edge of one of the leather chairs, her suitcase at her feet. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly in the silence. Adrian stayed behind his desk, his fingers trailing over the scattered papers. "Yesterday was unfortunate," he said finally, "but it was an accident, nothing more." "I should have knocked," Lena burst out, the words she'd been holding back all night spilling forth. "I should have been more careful. I'm so sorry, Mr. Hale. I never meant to intrude or make you uncomfortable." He held up a hand, stopping her flood of apologies. "Miss Walker, in the 3 days you've been here, you've shown nothing but diligence and respect. One mistake doesn't erase that." Lena blinked rapidly, fighting back tears of relief. You're not asking me to leave?" "No." Adrian's expression softened slightly. "In fact, I'm asking you to stay. The house has been different since you arrived. Less empty, perhaps." He moved around the desk, though he still maintained a careful distance. "We all make mistakes, Miss Walker. What matters is how we handle them afterward. Running away isn't always the answer." Something in his tone made Lena wonder if he was speaking from experience. She released her death grip on her skirts, not having realized she'd been clutching them. "If you're willing," Adrian continued, "I'd like you to remain in your position here. We can simply put yesterday's incident behind us." Lena's shoulders sagged with relief, the tension of the past 12 hours finally draining away. "Thank you, Mr. Hale. Thank you." Sunlight streamed through the tall windows as Lena worked, her hands steady now as she polished the silver in the dining room. The morning's conversation had lifted an enormous weight from her shoulders, though echoes of embarrassment still colored her cheeks whenever she thought about yesterday's incident. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 10, its deep chimes reverberating through the house. Lena moved to the china cabinet, carefully removing each delicate piece to dust both the shelves and the precious dishes. The familiar routine of cleaning helped settle her nerves. "Miss Walker?" Adrian's voice came from the doorway, measured and calm. Lena turned, fighting the urge to hide behind the china cabinet. "Yes, Mr. Hale?" He stood with perfect posture, hands clasped behind his back. "I wanted to inform you that I'll be taking lunch in my study today. Nothing elaborate, just a simple sandwich would suffice." "Of course, sir." She nodded, noting how he kept his distance while maintaining a polite tone. "Would you prefer turkey or ham?" "Turkey, please." He paused, then added, "And Miss Walker? There's no need to knock when bringing lunch. I'll leave the study door open." The gentle consideration in his voice made her throat tight. "Thank you, Mr. Hale." As he turned to leave, Lena noticed his shoulders weren't as rigid as usual. Something in his carefully maintained facade had softened, just slightly. At precisely noon, Lena carried a tray to his study. True to his word, the door stood open. Adrian sat at his desk, reading through papers with intense concentration. She placed the tray, turkey sandwich, apple slices, and hot tea, on the corner of his desk. "Thank you," he said, looking up. His eyes met hers briefly, and Lena saw something vulnerable there before he quickly looked away. Throughout the afternoon, their paths crossed several times as Lena went about her duties. Each encounter carried the same careful dance, polite words, measured distances, brief glances. Adrian seemed to be making an effort to acknowledge her presence while respecting her space, as if trying to rebuild the trust that yesterday's incident had shaken. When evening fell, Lena prepared a light dinner for them both. As always, she ate alone in the servants' kitchen, while Adrian dined in his study. The solitude felt different now, less isolating somehow. Still, an undercurrent of tension remained, like a string pulled almost too tight. In her room that night, Lena sat at the small desk and wrote in her journal, trying to make sense of the day's events. The mansion's familiar creaks and settling sounds surrounded her, no longer as threatening as they'd seemed yesterday. She could hear Adrian's footsteps in his study above, pacing as he often did late at night. Something had shifted between them, but Lena couldn't quite define it. The morning's forgiveness had opened a door, yet neither of them seemed sure how to step through it. Adrian's kindness felt genuine, but his guardedness remained, a wall built of past hurts that Lena could only guess at. She closed her journal and moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit gardens. The estate felt less oppressive now, but not quite welcoming either. Like its owner, it held its secrets close, revealing them only in small, careful measures. Tomorrow would bring another day of cautious interactions and measured words. For now, this fragile peace would have to be enough. The kitchen felt different in the pre-dawn quiet. Lena moved through the familiar space, gathering ingredients for breakfast as the first hints of morning light crept through the windows. Her hands worked with practiced care as she selected fresh eggs from the icebox and sliced bread for toast. Steam rose from the copper kettle as she prepared Earl Grey tea, remembering how she'd noticed several empty cups in Adrian's study yesterday. The china cup clinked softly against its saucer as she arranged everything on a silver tray. Lena paused, considering what else might tempt someone who rarely seemed to eat. She'd noticed the fruit bowl in the kitchen was always full, but never touched. Taking an orange, she sectioned it carefully, arranging the bright segments in a delicate pattern beside the eggs. The breakfast she'd prepared wasn't elaborate. Soft-boiled eggs nestled in silver cups, buttered toast points, orange segments, and hot tea. But she'd taken extra care with the presentation. The napkin was crisp and perfectly folded, the silver polished to a mirror shine. "Please eat something," she whispered to the empty kitchen, surprising herself with the quiet plea. The grandfather clock struck 6 as she carried the tray toward Adrian's study. The house was silent except for her soft footsteps on the carpeted floors. Morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the hallway. At the study door, Lena hesitated. Adrian had said she didn't need to knock when bringing lunch, but breakfast felt different, more intimate somehow. The morning hours held a vulnerability that the rest of the day didn't share. She set the tray on a nearby table and smoothed her apron, suddenly aware of every wrinkle in her uniform. The study door was closed this morning, unlike yesterday. Taking a deep breath, she lifted her hand to knock. Before her knuckles could touch the wood, the door opened. Adrian stood there, already dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, though his collar was unbuttoned and his sleeves rolled up. He looked as startled to see her as she felt seeing him. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," Lena managed, her voice steadier than she expected. "I've brought your breakfast." He stepped back, giving her space to enter. "You didn't need to go to such trouble." "It's no trouble, sir." She retrieved the tray and carried it to his desk, carefully moving aside a stack of papers to make room. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the silver, making it gleam. Adrian moved closer, studying the arranged breakfast. His expression softened as he noticed the orange segments. "You arranged them like flower petals." "I thought it might make the tray more appealing," Lena said, then worried she'd overstepped. "I can prepare something else if you'd prefer." "No," he interrupted gently. "This is—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "This is perfect, actually." His voice carried a warmth she hadn't heard before. "Thank you, Miss Walker." The words were simple, but the way he said them, quiet, genuine, almost vulnerable, made Lena's heart skip. Their eyes met for a moment, and this time neither looked away immediately. Something passed between them in that brief connection, an acknowledgement of shared humanity beyond their prescribed roles of employer and servant. "You're welcome, Mr. Hale," she replied softly, meaning it just as genuinely as his thanks. Evening shadows stretched across the formal dining room as Lena carried a freshly brewed pot of chamomile tea. The massive oak table, polished to a high shine, seemed to emphasize Adrian's solitude as he sat alone with his barely touched dinner. The click of her sensible shoes on the hardwood floor announced her presence. Adrian looked up from his plate, his expression guarded but less distant than usual. The morning's small exchange seemed to have shifted something between them, though neither quite knew what. "Would you care for some tea, Mr. Hale?" Lena asked, her voice gentle in the quiet room. The silver teapot gleamed in her hands, still steaming. Adrian nodded, setting down his fork. "Yes, thank you." He watched as she stepped closer, her movements careful and deliberate as she poured the golden liquid into his cup. The familiar aroma of chamomile filled the space between them. The silence felt different tonight, less strained, though still awkward. Lena noticed his dinner plate was mostly full, the roasted chicken and vegetables barely touched. Without thinking, she spoke. "Is the food not to your liking, sir?" Adrian's eyes flickered to his plate, then back to her face. "The food is fine," he said quietly. "I just find it difficult to eat alone sometimes." The admission hung in the air between them. Lena's hands stilled on the teapot, surprised by his honesty. She understood suddenly that this was more than just a statement about dinner. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from a man who seemed to live behind walls. "I could—" Lena hesitated, then gathered her courage. "I could stay for a moment, sir." while you finish your tea." Adrian looked startled, then thoughtful. After a long moment, he gestured to the chair beside him. "Please." Lena carefully set down the teapot and took the offered seat, smoothing her apron with nervous hands. The chair was more comfortable than any she'd sat in before, the fabric rich beneath her fingers. They sat in silence. But it wasn't the tense quiet of previous days. Adrian sipped his tea, and Lena noticed he began to take small bites of his dinner. The grandfather clock in the hall marked the seconds, its gentle ticking a counterpoint to the clink of silver against china. Through the tall windows, the last rays of sunset painted the room in soft gold. Lena watched the play of light across the table, aware of Adrian's presence beside her, but not feeling the need to fill the silence with words. Something was building in these quiet moments, a fragile trust, perhaps, or at least the beginning of understanding. When Adrian finally spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. "The tea is perfect." "Thank you, sir," Lena replied softly, noting that he'd eaten half his dinner while they sat together. The silence returned, but now it felt almost comfortable. They stayed that way for several more minutes, sharing the quiet of the evening as the room slowly darkened. No more words were needed. The simple act of sitting together, of acknowledging each other's presence, seemed to say enough. Lena dusted the hallway's antique side tables, working her way toward Mr. Hale's study. The afternoon sun streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. As she neared the heavy oak door, voices drifted out. Adrian's and another man's, tinny through what must have been a phone speaker. "Adrian, this is ridiculous," the voice insisted. "You need a full staff. That mansion's too big for one maid, no matter how capable she is." Lena's hands stilled on her feather duster. She knew she shouldn't eavesdrop, but something in the conversation held her in place. "I prefer it this way, Richard," Adrian replied, his tone firm. "You know why. It's been 5 years since the Thompson incident. Not everyone's trying to exploit you. The Thompsons were just the last in a long line. I'm tired of people pretending to care while eyeing my bank account." Lena's heart squeezed. She'd noticed the mansion's emptiness, but hadn't realized it was intentional. The thought of someone choosing such solitude made her chest ache. "At least consider a cook," Richard pressed. "Or a groundskeeper?" "No." Adrian's voice was quiet but final. "I'd rather have one person I might eventually trust than a dozen watching my every move, spreading gossip about the mysterious millionaire to the tabloids." Realizing she'd lingered too long, Lena moved to step away. Her duster caught a delicate vase, making it wobble. She grabbed it quickly, but not before it rattled on its base. The conversation inside stopped. "Is someone there?" Adrian called out. Lena's cheeks burned. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Hale," she answered, her voice trembling. "I was just dusting the hallway. I didn't mean to." "Come in, please." Taking a deep breath, Lena pushed open the heavy door. Adrian sat behind his desk, his phone dark on its surface. His expression was unreadable, but his shoulders held that familiar tension. "I'll call you back, Richard," he said, not taking his eyes off Lena. She twisted her hands in her apron. "Mr. Hale, I truly didn't mean to overhear. I should have announced myself or come back later." Adrian studied her for a long moment. "How much did you hear?" "Enough to understand why the house feels so empty," she admitted softly, "and why you prefer it that way." He leaned back in his chair, something vulnerable flickering across his face. "Does it bother you, working in such a quiet house?" "No," Lena answered honestly. "But it makes me sad that you've been hurt so badly you feel you need to live this way." Adrian's eyes widened slightly at her directness. He stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "People see the house, the cars, the investment portfolio. They don't see—" He trailed off. "They don't see you," Lena finished quietly. He turned to face her, surprise evident in his expression. "Exactly. They see dollar signs where a person should be. Even the staff I've hired in the past. They either treated me like a walking bank account or spread stories to the press about the eccentric rich man in his empty mansion." "Is that why you gave me a chance? After the incident with the door?" Lena asked. "Because I was more mortified about invading your privacy than excited about having gossip to share?" A ghost of a smile touched Adrian's lips. "Perhaps." He paused, considering her. "You're the first person in a long time who seems to see past all of—" He gestured vaguely at the opulent office. "This." Lena straightened her shoulders. "Money doesn't make a person, Mr. Hale. Actions do." The kitchen gleamed in the soft evening light as Lena prepared a simple dinner. Her earlier conversation with Adrian weighed heavily on her mind. She arranged a tray with extra care: soup, fresh bread, and tea for two. Though he hadn't asked her to join him, something told her tonight was different. When she carried the tray to his study, she found the door slightly ajar. Adrian sat in his usual spot by the window, silhouetted against the dying sun. He turned at her gentle knock, and for once didn't try to mask his surprise at seeing two place settings. "I thought you might like some company," Lena said softly, setting the tray on a small table. "But only if you wish." Adrian hesitated, then gestured to the empty chair. "Please." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the soup's warmth filling the space between them. Lena watched as Adrian's shoulders gradually relaxed, his movements becoming less rigid. "Mr. Hale," she began carefully, setting down her spoon. "May I share something with you?" He nodded, his eyes curious but guarded. "In my village we don't have much in terms of money or possessions," she said, smoothing her napkin. "But we have something that makes us rich in a different way. Faith in goodness, in each other." Adrian's hand stilled on his teacup. "That seems risky." "It can be," Lena acknowledged. "We get hurt sometimes. But we believe that closing ourselves off causes more pain than opening our hearts does." "Your village sounds very different from my world," Adrian said quietly. "The world of business and wealth?" Lena asked. "Perhaps. But people are people everywhere, Mr. Hale. Some will hurt you, yes, but others will surprise you with their kindness, their honesty." She watched as Adrian absorbed her words, his expression thoughtful. "My grandmother used to say that trust is like a garden. You have to tend it carefully, but you also have to plant the seeds in the first place. Nothing grows in empty soil." "Your grandmother sounds wise," Adrian murmured. "She was." Lena smiled softly. "She taught me that real wealth isn't in what we own, but in what we share. Not just things, but ourselves, our time, our trust, our hearts." Adrian's eyes met hers, something vulnerable flickering in their depths. "And when sharing leads to betrayal?" "Then we heal," Lena said gently. "We learn, but we don't stop planting gardens. The world needs more beauty, not less." She noticed his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his tea. "It's not easy," she continued, "choosing to believe in goodness when you've seen so much of the opposite. But I've found that kindness, real kindness, has a way of multiplying, like ripples in a pond." "Or weeds in a garden," Adrian said, but there was a hint of humor in his voice. "Sometimes those too," Lena smiled. "But even weeds can teach us something about resilience." She watched as Adrian turned to look out the window, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. His usual mask of careful control had softened, replaced by something more contemplative. "Faith isn't about never getting hurt," she added softly, It's about believing that love and kindness are worth the risk, that people, despite their flaws, are worth knowing. Adrian remained silent, but Lena could see her words had touched something deep within him. His eyes held a sheen of emotion he didn't try to hide, and his breathing had grown slightly uneven. "Thank you," he finally whispered, the words carrying more weight than their simplicity suggested. The evening shadows lengthened around them as they sat in companionable silence, the empty soup bowls between them forgotten, while Adrian processed her words with visible emotion. The morning sun cast long shadows across the kitchen as Lena prepared breakfast. She hummed softly while arranging eggs and toast on 2 plates, something that had become her new routine over the past couple of days. The quiet mornings no longer felt heavy with awkwardness, but rather held a gentle anticipation. Adrian appeared in the doorway at his usual time, his dark hair slightly disheveled. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying less of its usual guardedness. "Good morning, Mr. Hale." Lena placed his coffee beside his plate. "I hope you slept well?" He nodded, settling into what had become his spot at the small kitchen table. "Better than usual, actually." His fingers wrapped around the warm mug. "Your grandmother's tea suggestion helped." Lena smiled, remembering how she'd mentioned her grandmother's chamomile remedy the day before. "I'm glad. She always said nature provides the best medicines." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the clink of silverware mixing with bird song from the garden. Lena noticed how Adrian no longer tensed when she moved around the kitchen, how his shoulders remained relaxed as she refilled his coffee. During lunch that afternoon, Adrian surprised her by asking about her village. "You mentioned a harvest festival once?" "Yes," Lena's eyes brightened. "It's our biggest celebration of the year. Everyone brings something to share. Food, music, crafts. The whole village comes together in the town square." "Sounds chaotic," Adrian remarked, but his tone held curiosity rather than judgment. "Oh, it is," Lena laughed softly. "But that's part of its charm. Last year, Mrs. Peterson's prized pig got loose and ran straight through the pie contest table." The corners of Adrian's mouth twitched. "I imagine that didn't end well for the pies." "Not at all, but everyone helped clean up, and we ended up having twice as many pies the next day because everyone wanted to replace what was lost." She arranged green beans on her plate. "That's just how our village is. When something goes wrong, people come together." The next morning, Lena found Adrian already in the kitchen, attempting to operate the coffee maker. His brow furrowed in concentration as he pressed buttons randomly. "Would you like some help?" she offered, trying to hide her amusement. "I thought I could manage it," he admitted, stepping back. "But apparently making coffee is more complicated than running a business." "Here," Lena demonstrated the process. "It's just about knowing the right sequence. Like most things in life, I suppose." During dinner that evening, they discussed books they'd read, discovering a shared love for historical novels. Adrian revealed he had an extensive library upstairs, his voice warming as he described some rare editions. "Perhaps," he paused, considering his words carefully. "Perhaps you'd like to borrow some if you enjoy reading?" "I'd like that very much," Lena replied, touched by the offer. The following afternoon, while Lena dusted the study shelves, Adrian worked at his desk. The silence between them felt comfortable, broken occasionally by the rustle of papers or the soft swish of her duster. "You missed a spot," Adrian commented suddenly, pointing to a high corner. Lena looked where he indicated, then back at him, catching the teasing glint in his eyes. "Did I really, Mr. Hale?" "No," he admitted. And then something remarkable happened. He laughed. It was brief and quiet, but genuine. When it faded, a small smile remained on his face, softening his features and reaching his eyes in a way Lena hadn't seen before. Scene 1. Sunlight streamed through the study's tall windows as Lena organized the bookshelf, carefully placing each volume according to Adrian's precise system. The afternoon light caught dust motes dancing in the air, creating golden ribbons that stretched across the room. Adrian looked up from his desk, setting aside the document he'd been reviewing. "Lena," he said, his voice softer than usual, "I've realized I know very little about you, despite your being here these past weeks." Lena paused, a leather-bound book still in her hands. "There isn't much to tell, Mr. Hale." "Where did you work before coming here?" He turned his chair to face her fully, his expression showing genuine interest. "I helped at the village store for a while," she replied, sliding the book into place. "And before that I worked at the Green Valley Inn, about 20 miles south of here." Adrian's eyebrows lifted slightly. "The inn by the lake? With the red shutters?" "Yes, that's the one." Lena smiled, remembering. "I started in the kitchen, then moved to housekeeping. Mrs. Bennett, the owner, was very kind." "When was this?" Adrian's question held an odd note of curiosity. "Let's see. I was there for almost 2 years, leaving just before last winter." Lena moved to the next shelf, gathering more books that needed organizing. "And before that?" "I helped my parents with our small farm," she explained, "but we lost it during the drought 3 years ago. That's when I started working at different places." Her voice carried no bitterness, just quiet acceptance. Adrian stood and walked to the window, his reflection overlapping the garden view. "The drought affected many in this region," he said softly. "I remember visiting some of the affected areas." "You did?" Lena turned to look at him, surprised. "Yes, I was investigating ways to help." He seemed to choose his words carefully. "Did you ever visit the community center during that time? They were distributing aid." "A few times," Lena nodded, thinking back. "They helped many families, including ours, though I mostly remember the long lines and—" She paused, frowning slightly as a memory surfaced. "There was a man in a gray suit who would sometimes watch from the second-floor window. We used to wonder who he was." Adrian's shoulders tensed, almost imperceptibly. "The world can feel very small sometimes," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Then, louder, "We might have crossed paths before, Lena, without knowing it." Lena tilted her head, puzzled by his tone and the strange intensity in his expression. She opened her mouth to ask what he meant, but Adrian had already turned back to his desk, effectively ending the conversation. She returned to her task, but her mind kept circling back to his words. Had they really met before? And why did he seem so interested in that particular time in her past? The questions lingered as she continued shelving books, stealing occasional glances at Adrian's now focused form, bent over his work, his earlier openness replaced by his usual quiet concentration. Scene 1. Morning light filtered through the kitchen windows as Lena prepared breakfast, the familiar routine of measuring coffee grounds and setting out plates bringing comfort after yesterday's puzzling conversation. The sound of footsteps made her look up, surprised to see Adrian entering the kitchen rather than waiting in the dining room as usual. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying an unusual warmth. He stood awkwardly by the counter, as if unsure of his place in this space that had been solely Lena's domain. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," she replied, sliding a fresh pot of coffee onto the warming plate. "Breakfast will be ready in just a moment." "Actually," Adrian cleared his throat, "I wanted to tell you something." He leaned against the counter, his fingers drumming an uneven rhythm on the marble surface. "During the drought, when I was overseeing aid distribution, something happened that I've never forgotten." Lena paused in her preparation of toast, giving him her full attention. I lost my wallet one afternoon, he continued, his eyes distant with memory. It contained not just money, but documents I needed. Contracts, investment papers. He smiled slightly. Less careful back then about carrying important things. Lena's hands slowed in their work, a strange feeling beginning to form in her chest. A woman found it, Adrian said softly. She waited for hours at the community center to return it, refusing to leave until she could hand it directly to its owner. When I finally arrived, she wouldn't accept any reward. She just said... He looked directly at Lena now. Everyone needs help sometimes. The toast popped up with a sharp click that made Lena jump. Her hands trembled as she remembered that day. The heavy leather wallet she'd found in the mud outside the community center. The hours spent waiting, determined to ensure it reached its rightful owner safely. I never saw her face clearly, Adrian continued. She kept her head down, spoke quietly, but her words stayed with me. They were the first honest words anyone had spoken to me in years. Lena's mind raced back to that moment. The man in the expensive suit, his face shadowed in the dim hallway. She'd been too nervous to look up, too aware of her worn dress and muddy shoes. She remembered the weight of the wallet in her hands, how she'd guarded it carefully all afternoon. "It was you," Adrian said simply, watching her face. "Wasn't it?" The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle burble of the coffee maker. Lena's fingers gripped the edge of the counter as the connection clicked into place. The mysterious man from her memory of the drought, the owner of the wallet, and Adrian were all the same person. She began, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know who you were. The wallet was so nice, I knew it had to be important to someone." "You could have taken it," Adrian said. "You needed money then. Everyone did." Lena shook her head, finally meeting his gaze. "It wasn't mine to take." They stood in the morning light, the simple truth of that long-ago moment hanging between them. Lena saw something shift in Adrian's expression, a softening, a recognition. The distance that had seemed so vast between employer and employee suddenly narrowed, bridged by an act of honesty from years before. The coffee maker gave a final sputter, breaking the spell of the moment. Lena stared at Adrian, still processing this revelation, while the scent of slightly overdone toast filled the air. Scene 1. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the study windows as Lena dusted the bookshelves, still thinking about the morning's revelation. The quiet routine of her work was interrupted by the sharp click of dress shoes on hardwood floors and an unfamiliar voice echoing from the hallway. "Adrian, we need to discuss the Foundation's annual gala," a man called out, his tone businesslike and brisk. Lena peered around the bookshelf to see a well-dressed man in his 50s striding into the study, his tablet computer tucked under one arm. Adrian followed, looking slightly tense. "Marcus, I thought we agreed to hold it at the convention center this year," Adrian said, settling behind his desk. Marcus shook his head, tapping rapidly on his tablet. The board voted. "They want it here at the estate. Your home's elegance and the gardens will create the perfect atmosphere for donations." He glanced up, noticing Lena. "Ah, the new housekeeper?" "Yes," Adrian answered, his voice carefully neutral. "This is Lena." Lena nodded politely and resumed her dusting, though her ears caught every word of their conversation. "The gala's in 3 weeks," Marcus continued, pulling up schedules on his tablet. "We'll need a full staff for the event. Servers, valets, security. I've already contacted the usual agency. We're expecting around 200 guests." Adrian's chair creaked as he leaned back. 200? "All major donors and potential supporters. The Foundation needs this, Adrian. Last year's drought relief efforts depleted our reserves." Lena's hands slowed on the shelves as she remembered the community center during the drought, the long lines of people seeking help. She hadn't known then that Adrian was behind those aid efforts. Fine, Adrian sighed. But I want minimal disruption to the house beforehand. Marcus scrolled through his tablet. The catering team will need access to the kitchen starting 3 days prior. The decorators will arrive 2 days before. We'll need the entire first floor and gardens prepared. Lena felt her stomach tighten. Such a large event would mean dozens of strangers in the house, disrupting the quiet routine she and Adrian had settled into. She thought of the peaceful breakfasts, their growing comfort with each other's presence. "And your housekeeper?" Marcus asked, glancing at Lena again. "Will she be able to handle the additional preparations?" Before Adrian could answer, Lena spoke up softly. "I can help wherever needed, sir." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Good. We'll need all hands on deck. The guest list includes several board members who've been skeptical about Adrian's management of the foundation. This event needs to be perfect." Adrian's face tightened almost imperceptibly at those words. Lena recognized the look. It was the same guarded expression he'd worn when they first met. After Marcus left, armed with Adrian's reluctant approval, Lena retreated to the kitchen. As she prepared afternoon tea, her mind wandered to the upcoming gala. 200 wealthy guests in elegant clothes, judging every detail of the house, every service provided. She thought of her simple black dress. Perfectly adequate for daily housekeeping, but hardly suitable for such a grand event. Setting the tea tray with trembling hands, Lena wondered where she would fit in among the glittering crowd and professional staff. Would she be hidden away in the kitchen? Asked to serve alongside the catering team? The quiet understanding she and Adrian had built seemed suddenly fragile against the approaching wave of social obligations and scrutiny. She carried the tea tray toward Adrian's study, her footsteps heavier than usual under the weight of her worries. Scene 1. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead as Lena adjusted a flower arrangement in the grand foyer. Her hands trembled slightly as she tucked in a wayward rose, conscious of her plain black dress among the arriving guests in their designer gowns and tuxedos. The click of high heels on marble and the gentle murmur of sophisticated conversation filled the once quiet halls. "Everything looks wonderful," the head caterer assured her as she passed with a tray of champagne flutes. But Lena felt out of place, like a sparrow among peacocks. She had spent the day directing delivery people, coordinating with the catering staff, and ensuring every corner of the estate gleamed. Now, as twilight painted the windows in purple and gold, she wondered if she should retreat to the kitchen. Wealthy couples drifted through the foyer, their jewelry catching the light. Lena recognized some faces from business magazines, CEOs, philanthropists, old money families. They barely glanced at her as they made their way to the ballroom, where classical music drifted from a string quartet. She spotted Adrian across the room, impeccable in his tuxedo, but looking slightly uncomfortable as he shook hands with board members. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw the familiar tension in his shoulders that appeared whenever he was surrounded by people who wanted something from him. "The garden entrance needs more votives," a decorator called out, and Lena hurried to help, grateful for the task. As she arranged tiny flickering candles along the path, she thought about how different this was from their quiet evenings when Adrian would sometimes join her for tea in the kitchen. The night air carried the sweet scent of blooming jasmine as guests began spilling out onto the terrace. Lena stayed in the shadows, straightening chairs and collecting empty glasses. She overheard snippets of conversation about stock portfolios and vacation homes, feeling increasingly invisible. Then Marcus's voice cut through the crowd, asking everyone to gather in the ballroom for Adrian's speech. Lena found a spot near the back, beside a potted palm, as Adrian took his place at the microphone. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice steady despite his obvious discomfort with public speaking. The Foundation's work this past year would not have been possible without your generous support. He spoke about the drought relief efforts, about new initiatives for the coming year. But then his tone changed, becoming more personal. Many of you have asked why I've become more involved in the Foundation's daily operations lately, he said. The truth is, I lost faith in people for a while. I surrounded myself with walls, both literal and metaphorical. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found Lena. But sometimes grace comes in unexpected forms. Lena's heart began to race as Adrian continued. Years ago, a young woman working as a cleaner found my wallet. Instead of taking the money inside, enough to change her life, she tracked me down and returned it. That same woman now works in this house, and her daily kindness has reminded me why this foundation exists, to help good people who struggle to help themselves. Tears welled in Lena's eyes as whispers rippled through the crowd. Some guests turned to look at her, but she barely noticed them. So tonight, I want to thank Lena, Adrian said, his voice warm with sincerity. Not just for returning my wallet all those years ago, but for showing me that genuine goodness still exists in this world. Her integrity and compassion have restored my faith in humanity. Tears slipped down Lena's cheeks as gentle applause filled the room. Through blurry eyes, she saw Adrian smile at her. Not his usual guarded smile, but something real and warm and grateful. The last guests were filtering out through the grand entrance, leaving behind empty champagne glasses and the lingering scent of expensive perfume. Lena moved quietly through the ballroom, gathering discarded napkins and straightening chairs. Her cheeks still felt warm from Adrian's kind words earlier, and her heart felt fuller than it had in years. As she bent to collect a fallen appetizer plate, voices drifted from the adjacent sitting room. Through the partially open door, she could see two elegant women settling onto the plush sofa, apparently waiting for their drivers. Well, that was quite the performance, one woman said, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she gestured. I never thought I'd see Adrian Hale get so sentimental. Especially over a maid, the other woman replied, her voice dripping with disdain. Though you have to admire her cleverness. Lena froze, her hand hovering over the plate. Oh? The first woman leaned forward. What do you mean? It's obvious, isn't it? The second woman lowered her voice, but not enough. Returns his wallet years ago, then somehow ends up working in his house? Please, she's clearly playing the long game. You think she planned it? These people always do. They see wealth and plot how to get close to it. First it's the wallet, such a perfect story, by the way. Then she shows up here, all humble and hard-working. Next thing you know, she'll have convinced him she's different from all those other gold diggers. Lena's hands began to shake. The plate clattered against the others she'd collected, but the women didn't notice. Poor Adrian, the first woman sighed. He's so desperate to believe someone actually cares about him for himself. It makes him vulnerable to this sort of manipulation. Exactly. And did you see how she cried during his speech? Such calculated innocence. Lena backed away from the door, her vision blurring. The plates in her hands suddenly felt too heavy, too much like the weight crushing her chest. She hurried toward the kitchen, nearly colliding with a server clearing the last of the dessert trays. The kitchen's fluorescent lights seemed harsh after the soft glow of the ballroom. Lena set the plates down with trembling hands, trying to steady her breathing. But the women's words kept echoing in her head, twisting her beautiful moment into something ugly and false. She thought of Adrian's smile during his speech. So genuine, so trusting. Now that trust felt like a knife in her heart. Would he believe these whispers too? Would he look at her tomorrow and see calculation where there was only gratitude? Unable to face the remaining cleanup, Lena slipped out of the kitchen and hurried down the servants' corridor. Her footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as she climbed the back stairs to her room. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighted down by shame she didn't deserve and accusations she couldn't fight. Inside her modest room, Lena sank onto the bed, still wearing her plain black dress from the gala. The moonlight streaming through her window seemed to mock the tears now falling freely down her cheeks. She had never planned any of this. Not finding the wallet, not taking this job, not earning Adrian's trust. But those women's words had tainted everything, making even her purest intentions seem suspicious. She curled up on her side, hugging her pillow close as sobs shook her shoulders. The joy and belonging she'd felt earlier had shattered, leaving behind only the sharp edges of doubt and humiliation. In the quiet darkness of her room, Lena felt more alone than she had since first arriving at the estate. Dawn hadn't yet broken when Lena woke, her eyes puffy from crying. The estate lay quiet, wrapped in that ethereal stillness that comes before sunrise. She slipped from her bed and knelt beside it, clasping her hands together as she had done every morning since childhood. "Dear Lord," she whispered, her voice trembling, "please give me strength to do what's right. Help me protect Adrian's peace, even if it means breaking my own heart." Her prayer caught in her throat as fresh tears threatened to fall. Rising slowly, Lena moved to her small dresser. Her few possessions looked pitiful as she laid them in her worn suitcase, the same one she'd arrived with just weeks ago. Each item held memories now. The apron she'd worn while serving Adrian his first breakfast, the simple dress she'd changed into after the laundry incident, the prayer book her mother had given her. The cruel whispers from last night echoed in her mind as she folded her clothes. "These people always do," they had said, as if they knew her heart, as if they could see darkness where there was only light. Lena's hands shook as she packed her hairbrush, remembering how proud she'd felt when Adrian thanked her at the gala. That pride now felt like shame. Those women's words had poisoned everything, making her question every interaction, every smile, every moment of connection she'd shared with Adrian. How long before others started whispering too? How long before Adrian himself began to doubt her intentions? She couldn't bear the thought of seeing suspicion creep into his eyes, of watching their fragile trust wither under the weight of others' assumptions. Better to leave now, while he still remembered her kindly. Lena changed into her traveling clothes and carefully made her bed one last time. The room looked just as neat as when she'd first arrived, as if she'd never been there at all. Only the small water stain on the pillow, from her tears last night, betrayed any trace of her presence. She pulled out a piece of paper and pen, determined to leave some explanation. But what could she say? That she was leaving to protect him from malicious gossip. That she couldn't bear to have their genuine connection twisted into something calculated and false? After several attempts, she simply wrote, "Thank you for your kindness and trust. I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger. Lena." The note felt inadequate, but anything more might seem like the very manipulation those women had accused her of. She placed it on her perfectly made bed, where the morning light would find it. Picking up her suitcase, Lena took one last look around the room. In just a few weeks, this space had become more than just a servant's quarters. It had become a sanctuary, where she'd dared to dream of belonging. Now those dreams felt foolish and naive. The house was still dark as she crept down the back stairs, each step careful and quiet. She passed the kitchen where she'd prepared countless meals, the dining room where she'd shared tentative conversations with Adrian, the ballroom where just hours ago she'd felt so blessed by his public acknowledgement. Now it all felt like a beautiful dream from which she had to wake herself. The morning air was crisp and cool as she slipped out the service entrance. Dew dampened her shoes as she walked down the gravel path toward the gates, her suitcase feeling heavier with each step. As she reached the gates, the first rays of sunlight began to paint the sky in gentle pinks and golds. Lena paused, looking back at the mansion one last time. Somewhere inside, Adrian still slept, unaware that she was leaving. She hoped he would understand, even if he never knew the full reason why. Then, squaring her shoulders and wiping away a final tear, Lena walked through the gates and onto the road beyond, leaving behind the place where she'd briefly found belonging, and the man who had shown her what trust could feel like. The morning sun streamed through Adrian's bedroom windows, casting long shadows across his floor. He lay in bed for a moment, listening to the familiar silence of his home. But something felt different today, a heaviness in the air he couldn't quite place. Finally rising, he dressed methodically, his mind drifting to the events of last night's gala. He remembered Lena's face when he'd acknowledged her publicly, the genuine surprise and warmth in her eyes. A faint smile crossed his lips at the memory. The hallways echoed with his footsteps as he made his way downstairs, expecting to smell coffee brewing or hear the quiet sounds of Lena's morning routine. Instead, he found the kitchen dark and cold. No breakfast waited on the counter. No kettle whistled on the stove. "Lena?" he called out, his voice bouncing off empty walls. The silence that answered made his stomach tighten. Moving through the house with increasing urgency, Adrian checked the living room, the library, the garden. Each empty space amplified his growing unease. Finally, he climbed the stairs to her room, something he'd never done before out of respect for her privacy. The door creaked open to reveal a perfectly made bed, everything neat and orderly. Too neat. His eyes fell on the folded paper resting on the pillow. With trembling fingers, he picked up the note, reading Lena's few words over and over until they blurred before his eyes. Adrian sank onto the edge of her bed, the paper crumpling in his grip. The room still held traces of her presence, a faint scent of lavender, a forgotten hair ribbon on the dresser. Each detail twisted something deep in his chest. He thought of their shared meals, their careful conversations, the way she'd listened without judgment when he'd confessed his fears about people only wanting his money. She'd shown him what genuine kindness looked like, reminded him of that long-ago day when she'd returned his wallet without asking for anything in return. The emptiness of the house pressed in around him, no longer the comfortable solitude he'd once cherished. Now it felt oppressive, echoing with all the words he should have said. His eyes burned as he realized how much he'd come to depend on her quiet presence, her gentle faith in people's goodness, her way of making this vast house feel like a home. Standing at her window, Adrian stared out at the grounds where just yesterday guests had mingled at the gala. Had something happened? What had made her leave so suddenly, without a proper goodbye? The note offered no real answers, only an apology that made his heart ache. He wandered back downstairs to the kitchen, where everything remained exactly as it had been the night before. No breakfast dishes in the sink, no coffee cup waiting for him, no Lena humming softly as she worked. The silence felt deafening now. Mechanically, Adrian prepared his own coffee, the routine feeling wrong without her there. Each small task highlighted her absence, the sugar bowl she always kept filled, the fresh flowers she placed on the counter every morning, the window she opened to let in the morning breeze. Sitting alone at the kitchen table, Adrian felt the full weight of emptiness settle around him. He'd grown so accustomed to her presence that its sudden absence left him feeling adrift. The walls seemed to close in, reminding him of all the lonely years before she'd arrived. Years he'd convinced himself he preferred. Now, holding his cooling coffee and staring at the empty chair across from him, Adrian realized just how much light Lena had brought into his carefully ordered world, and how dark it felt without her. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Adrian's study as he sat at his desk, phone pressed to his ear. His jaw tightened as he listened to his event manager recount the whispers from last night's gala. "Mr. Hale, I heard several guests questioning your relationship with the maid," Thompson said hesitantly. "Mrs. Blackwood was particularly vocal about it being inappropriate." Adrian's free hand curled into a fist. "And you did nothing to stop these rumors?" "Sir, I didn't think—" "No, you didn't," Adrian cut in, his voice sharp. "Call Mrs. Blackwood. Set up a meeting. Today." An hour later, Adrian stood in his living room, facing the elegantly dressed woman who'd helped spread poison through his home. Blackwood smiled warmly, clearly expecting their usual pleasant business discussion. "Eleanor," Adrian said, his tone causing her smile to falter. "I understand you had quite a lot to say about my staff last night." She shifted in her seat, smoothing her silk skirt. "Adrian, dear, we were only concerned. A young, unmarried woman living here alone with you. People talk." "People like you?" His words cut through the air like ice. "People who assume the worst because they themselves have never shown genuine kindness without expecting something in return?" Piaz, Blackwood's face flushed. "Now really, I was only thinking of your reputation." "My reputation?" Adrian stepped closer, his voice low and controlled. "Let me tell you about reputation. Years ago, when I lost my wallet containing thousands in cash, that same young, unmarried woman found it. She returned every penny without asking for anything. She didn't even tell me her name." He turned to stare out the window, remembering. That single act of honesty made me question everything I believed about people only wanting my money. And now she's gone, because of whispers from people like you who can't imagine kindness without ulterior motives. I had no idea," Mrs. Blackwood stammered. "No, you didn't," Adrian agreed coldly. "You saw what you wanted to see, and now I've lost someone irreplaceable because of it." After showing Mrs. Blackwood out, Adrian made several more calls, systematically confronting each person who'd spread the rumors. With each conversation, the hollow ache in his chest grew, knowing these actions came too late to keep Lena from leaving. As evening approached, Adrian stood in his study, watching shadows creep across the lawn. He thought of Lena's quiet strength, her unwavering faith in people's goodness, even when they proved her wrong. He remembered her gentle smile when she'd served his morning coffee, the way she'd listened without judgment when he shared his fears. The truth hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't just lost a good employee. He'd lost someone who'd shown him what real trust looked like. Someone who'd brought warmth back into his cold, empty house. Someone who deserved to know exactly what she meant to him. Adrian reached for his phone, dialing Thompson again. "I need you to find someone for me," he said firmly. "Her name is Lena Martinez. She left this morning, and I need to tell her the truth." "The truth about what, sir?" Adrian's voice softened. "That she changed my life twice, once when she returned my wallet years ago, and again by showing me that genuine kindness still exists in this world, and I'm not ready to lose that again." The setting sun painted the village streets in warm orange hues as Lena dragged her worn suitcase along the familiar dirt path. Her shoulders slumped with exhaustion, both physical and emotional, as she approached her family's modest home. The sound of children playing nearby mixed with the evening calls of birds, creating a symphony of homecoming that should have brought comfort. Her mother spotted her first through the kitchen window. "Lena!" she called out, wiping her hands on her apron as she hurried to the door. "¿Qué pasó? Why are you back so soon?" Lena tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "Mama," was all she could manage before her mother enveloped her in a tight hug that smelled of fresh tortillas and familiar spices. "Come inside, mija," her mother urged, taking the suitcase. "Your father just got home from work. Miguel, come quick! Lena's home!" Her father appeared in the doorway, his work clothes still dusty from the construction site. His weathered face creased with concern. "What happened at the estate? Did that rich man treat you badly?" "No, Papa," Lena said quickly, shaking her head. "It wasn't like that at all." She followed them inside, where her younger sister Rosa was setting the dinner table. "Lena!" Rosa squealed, throwing her arms around her sister. "I missed you so much, but why are you back? You said it would be at least a month." The familiar chaos of family dinner swirled around her, as her mother insisted on serving her extra portions. Her father asked careful questions about the job, and Rosa chattered about village gossip she'd missed. Lena answered their questions with careful half-truths, not wanting to worry them. "The position, it just wasn't right for me," she explained, pushing rice around her plate. "But the pay was good for the time I was there. I can help with bills this month." Her mother reached across the table to pat her hand. "Money isn't everything, mi amor. We're just happy to have you home." After dinner, Lena helped with dishes while her family shared stories about their days. The routine was comforting, but each mundane detail made her think of quiet moments in Adrian's kitchen. The way he'd started joining her for morning coffee, how his guarded expression had slowly softened into genuine smiles. "I'm a bit tired from traveling," she said finally, excusing herself. "I think I'll turn in early." In her small bedroom, Lena carefully unpacked her suitcase. Each item reminded her of the estate: the uniform she'd worn while serving breakfast, the book Adrian had lent her one quiet afternoon, the simple cross necklace she'd worn to the gala. Her hands trembled as she tucked them away in her dresser. Sitting on her narrow bed, Lena finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her departure. The whispered words of the party guests echoed in her mind. Gold digger? Taking advantage? Suspicious? She pressed her face into her pillow to muffle a sob. She thought of Adrian's kind eyes when he'd thanked her during the gala. How proud she'd felt in that moment. Now that pride felt tainted by the cruel assumptions of others. Worse was knowing she'd left without saying goodbye, without explaining. But how could she stay, knowing her presence might damage his reputation? Lena heard her family's voices drifting through the thin walls, her father's deep laugh, her mother's gentle scolding, Rosa's excited chatter. They were happy to have her home, and she should be grateful. Instead, her heart ached for a different home, one filled with quiet conversations and growing trust, now lost to her forever. Rolling onto her side, Lena pulled her blanket tight around her shoulders and let silent tears fall, mourning what might have been. The afternoon sun beat down on the village square as Lena helped her mother sort through vegetables at their small produce stand. She tried to focus on the simple task of separating good tomatoes from overripe ones, but her mind kept drifting back to the estate. "Lena, Mira," her mother whispered, nudging her arm. "That fancy car." Lena looked up to see a sleek black car crawling down the narrow dirt street, drawing stares from everyone in the square. Her heart stopped when she recognized it. Adrian's car. The vehicle came to a stop near the village center, and Adrian stepped out, looking completely out of place in his tailored suit. He scanned the crowd until his eyes found her. Lena's hands trembled as she set down a tomato. "That's him, isn't it?" her mother asked softly. "The man you worked for?" Before Lena could answer, Mrs. Rodriguez from the bakery approached Adrian, her voice carrying across the square. "Are you looking for someone, senor?" "Yes," Adrian said clearly, his voice steady despite the curious onlookers gathering around him. "I'm looking for Lena Martinez." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Lena's father emerged from his workshop across the street, wiping his hands on a rag and frowning. Other villagers appeared in doorways and windows, drawn by the unusual sight. "I'm here," Lena said quietly, stepping forward. Her mother squeezed her arm supportively. Adrian walked toward her, ignoring the growing crowd. "Lena, I need to speak with you, and with everyone else here too." Sortituma Garcia, the village elder, stepped forward. "What business do you have with our Lena?" Adrian turned to address the gathering crowd. "I came to clear up some lies that were spread at my estate. Lies that hurt someone who has shown nothing but integrity and kindness." Lena felt her cheeks burn as all eyes turned to her. She wanted to run, to hide, but something in Adrian's expression made her stay. "Some wealthy people at my home made cruel assumptions about Lena," Adrian continued, his voice growing stronger. "They whispered that she was trying to take advantage of me, to get my money, but they don't know her like I do." He turned to face the villagers directly. "Years ago, before I knew her name, Lena found my wallet containing thousands of dollars. She returned it without taking a single penny. When she worked in my home, she showed the same honest character every day. She treated me like a person, not a bank account." Lena's eyes filled with tears as Adrian spoke. Her father stepped closer, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "I'm here because Lena left thinking she was protecting me from gossip," Adrian said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I won't let lies drive away someone who helped me remember what true integrity looks like." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "We raised our Lena right," she declared, and several others murmured in agreement. "Say, that's our Lena," Mr. Garcia added firmly. "Always honest, always hard-working." The village's unified support wrapped around Lena like a warm blanket. She saw heads nodding, heard voices rising to affirm her character. Even the teenage boys who usually lounged by the corner store stood straight and serious, adding their own words of support. Adrian met her eyes across the square. "Your community knows who you really are, Lena, and so do I." The sun was setting over the village square, painting the adobe walls in warm orange hues. Most of the villagers had returned to their homes, but the buzz of excitement still lingered in the air. Lena sat with Adrian at her family's small wooden table in their courtyard, her parents nearby, listening intently. "I've been thinking about this for a while," Adrian explained, his hands wrapped around a cup of her mother's fresh coffee. The evening breeze rustled through the bougainvillea, climbing the courtyard walls. "When you returned my wallet all those years ago, it wasn't just about the money. It was about integrity." Lena's mother nodded encouragingly, while her father leaned forward in his chair, his weathered face thoughtful. "There are so many young people who need someone to believe in them," Adrian continued, his voice growing animated. "People who have dreams but lack opportunities. I want to create a foundation that helps them, one that's built on the same values you showed me, Lena." He pulled out a folder from his briefcase and opened it on the table. "The foundation will provide education grants, small business loans, and mentorship programs. But more than that, it will focus on character development and community service." Lena's eyes widened as she looked at the detailed plans. The foundation's proposed budget was more than she could comprehend, but what caught her attention were the program descriptions. Each one emphasized building trust, fostering integrity, and supporting honest hard work. "This is incredible," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian smiled, the warmth reaching his eyes. "But it needs something more. It needs someone who truly understands these values, someone who lives them every day." He turned to face her directly. "Lena, I want you to help lead this foundation." Her father's chair creaked as he straightened. "Our Lena?" he asked, pride mixing with surprise in his voice. Yes, Adrian said firmly. She would work directly with the community, helping to select grant recipients and mentor them. Her insight would be invaluable. Lena's hands trembled slightly as she looked at the papers. But I don't have the education for this kind of work. You're just the person who taught me to trust again, Adrian interrupted gently. You're the one who showed me that wealth isn't what gives someone value. That's exactly what this foundation needs. Her mother reached over and squeezed her hand. Mihisha, you've always had a gift for seeing the good in people. The salary would allow you to live comfortably, Adrian continued, but more importantly, you'd be helping others like yourself, people with strong values who just need a chance. Lena felt tears welling up in her eyes as she realized what this meant. The whispers and cruel assumptions from the gala seemed to fade away, replaced by something stronger. Purpose. This wasn't charity or pity. It was recognition of her character, her values, her worth. I would be honored, she said softly, her voice growing stronger, to help others, to make a difference. Adrian nodded, understanding in his eyes. The foundation will be named the Martinez Integrity Foundation, if you'll allow it. Her father cleared his throat, clearly moved. You would name it after our family? It's fitting, Adrian replied. Your daughter's actions changed my life. Now, together, we can change many more. Lena looked around at her family's small courtyard, at the simple life she'd always known, and at the opportunity before her. This wasn't about leaving her roots behind. It was about helping others grow from them. The Martinez Integrity Foundation's office hummed with activity on a bright spring morning. Through the estate's newly renovated east wing, sunshine poured across polished wooden floors, where stacks of grant applications waited to be reviewed. The mansion that had once felt like a tomb now buzzed with purpose and life. Lena sat at her desk, reviewing a promising application from a young mechanic who wanted to start a training program for underprivileged youth. Her simple blazer and practical shoes reflected her unchanged values, even as she'd grown more confident in her new role. On the walls around her, framed photos showed smiling faces of grant recipients, a baker who'd opened her own shop, a teacher who'd started an after-school program, a carpenter who now ran a successful furniture business. Down the hall she could hear Adrian in a meeting with the foundation's board members. His voice carried differently now, warmer, more engaged. The heavy curtains that had once shrouded the windows were gone, replaced by light, gauzy fabrics that let in natural light. Even the gardens had transformed, with local students tending vegetable plots as part of a sustainable agriculture program. Ms. Martinez? A young intern knocked on her open door. The new mentorship groups are ready for their orientation. Lena smiled, remembering her own first days at the estate. Thank you, Miguel. I'll be right there. She walked through the halls, noting how the house had changed. Where silence had once pressed heavily, there was now gentle conversation and occasional laughter. The kitchen that had felt so lonely during her early days as a maid now served as a training facility for aspiring chefs. Even Mrs. Rogers, the part-time housekeeper, seemed happier with the constant flow of activity. In the main conference room, 20 nervous faces looked up at her. These were the foundation's newest mentees, people chosen not for their connections or wealth, but for their character and determination. Lena saw her younger self in their hopeful expressions. Welcome, she began, her voice warm and sure. Each of you is here because someone saw your potential, just as someone once saw mine. As she spoke, she noticed Adrian quietly slip into the back of the room. He'd shed his formal business attire for a simple shirt and slacks. His posture relaxed as he listened. The walls he'd built around himself had gradually come down, brick by brick, replaced by genuine connections with the people whose lives the foundation touched. After the orientation, as the mentees filed out chattering excitedly about their projects, Lena and Adrian found themselves alone in the room. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. The distant sound of voices and footsteps echoed through the halls, a reminder that the house was no longer a place of isolation. They sat together in comfortable silence, both looking out at the gardens where spring flowers had begun to bloom. On Lena's desk sat the old wallet that had started everything, now framed as a reminder of how small acts of kindness could change lives. "Sometimes I can hardly believe how different everything is," Adrian said softly, his eyes taking in the transformed space. Lena nodded, remembering the fear and uncertainty she'd felt that first evening at the gates. Who would have thought that getting lost and opening the wrong door could lead to all this? Adrian smiled, the expression now coming naturally to him. They sat together in the warm afternoon light, two people who had found healing in helping others, their shared gratitude filling the comfortable silence between them.